So I was looking at my news feed recently, Chrissy, and I saw an announcement by Mikhaila Peterson, who some may have heard of in the health world. She created the Lion Diet, which is basically just eating beef as a healing modality. But probably more likely people know her as the daughter of Jordan Peterson, the famous psychologist and philosopher. And she announced, basically on his behalf, that he had been diagnosed with CIRS, which stands for Chronic Inflammatory Response Syndrome. And so I had been diagnosed with that a few years ago, and I would say, part of my road to recovery from the health issues that I faced before was by addressing that. And I thought, actually, we haven't done an episode on that. Let's do that now, and maybe more people are going to be aware of the diagnosis and aware of the issue. And in fact, CIRS is like an extreme version of what I think is happening to a lot of people, especially since 2020. So I thought, let's do an episode and talk about it.
Hello and welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I'm here with my co-host, the creator and founder of Genetic Insights and the author of the Rejuvenate Blueprint, Elwin Robinson. And as you just heard from that lovely intro, we are discussing CIRS today. So maybe you might know something about it. If you do, let us know in the comments. And as always, thank you guys for helping us grow this community. It is in our deepest place of bringing to you this information so that you can optimize your health and wellness. And we do that lovingly as we're creating this community. And we are so honored that you guys are joining us today. So thank you for helping us grow and expand this community of individuals who are so ready for optimization. So today's episode, we're going to kick it off right now discussing CIRS. So Elwin, you did describe it as it is the chronic inflammatory response syndrome, correct? What is that? What's causing it? What is it? How did they figure it out? Because it's to be honest, it just kind of sounds like a name for something where people don't really know much about.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I've said that before. Whenever the word syndrome is in there, it kind of means we don't know what causes it. Actually, in this case, that's not quite true. Despite the name, there are some very definite ideas of what caused it. And the person who christened it that name, Dr. Richard Schumaker, who we'll talk about in a few minutes, he talked about it being a biotoxin-induced illness, but he was especially focused on mold. And so we'll talk about that. But I do not think it is exclusively mold. So I'll get into that perspective as well. But yeah, I'll read you kind of not dictionary definition, but the kind of mainstream definition. So CIRS is a progressive, multi-system, multi-symptom illness characterized by chronic inflammation triggered by exposure to biotoxins, affecting all kinds of bodily systems, including, and this is especially where it's noticeable, neurological, endocrine, and immune systems. It manifests as a complex syndrome where the body's immune response fails to properly eliminate biotoxins, leading to ongoing inflammation and symptoms like fatigue, pain, cognitive issues, and respiratory problems. I'd add to that another hallmark of it is reactions to various things. So one of the classic signs that someone has CIRS is that they're bothered by everything, not just, the kind of standard stuff, maybe like gluten or, whatever, the things that a lot of people at least claim to be bothered by these days, but, completely healthy stuff that should be totally fine. Like, I don't know, air, water, like lettuce, the kind of things that you wouldn't expect that a person would have a response to at all, they may still have a response to. And then just to finish reading here, it says often misdiagnosed as conditions like chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia, CIRS impacts an estimated 1 in 4 people with genetic susceptibility. And then who has genetic susceptibility? I mean, I'll get into that a little bit more in a minute, but it's about 25% of people. So if we add those two together, we can say 25% of 25%. So we're talking about 6% of people, which is 1 in 15, something like that. So if this is a real diagnosis, and if it is a real condition, then this is actually a massive thing that has been discovered, and it explains a lot of why there is that significant minority of people who just have endless chronic health problems that do not seem to have a clear cause. Now, there is that overlap. So this, in that sense, it is like CFS and fibromyalgia. It shares a few things with that. First of all, the symptoms. So chronic pain, chronic fatigue, chronic neurological issues tend to be things that go along with all three. With the CIRS, there's more of it's more like what's emphasized. So the CIRS, I would say what's more emphasized is the reaction to things, the inflammatory reaction to things. With CFS, what's more emphasized is the exhaustion, the tiredness. With fibromyalgia, what's more emphasized is the pain. And also, to be honest with CIRS, the other thing that I'd say is emphasized a lot is the neurological issues. People really struggle with thinking clearly in various different ways. But they all kind of overlap to some degree. And if we look at chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia through the same lens as we were encouraged to recently by Dr. Perrin, who we interviewed and featured on this show, you will see that Dr. Perrin actually also felt like ultimately toxins were the root cause of those issues. Through a different mechanism that CIRS talks about. He talked about the issue is more with the lymphatic system not working correctly and the toxins not being able to drain from the body in general, but specifically from the brain. And he saw that as a root cause. So again, the overlap there of toxins affecting the nervous system, and you'll see that with CIRS, that's also very much what they're focused on. So are they actually three separate, distinct, different diseases? I'm not so sure, because they seem to actually have the same root, but they may be. So, with chronic fatigue, if Dr. Perrin's correct, and I believe he is based on my research into it and also my experience of doing the treatment for 6 months, it was extremely helpful. It may be that the similarity is the toxins affecting the nervous system. Perhaps in the case of CIRS, the problem is not the one that he identified, where the lymphatic system of the brain specifically is not draining properly. In fact, it's the opposite. It's actually pumping more toxins into the brain. In a nutshell, that's his theory. That may not always be what's going on with CIRS. So that may be what, one of the hallmarks that makes them different diagnoses.
Okay. Yeah, because as we've discussed, usually with everybody, it's a case-by-case basis. We know that they may be exposed to the same things, but for one individual, it will show up in point A, another individual, it'll show up in point B. So could that potentially be a case with these things? It's like for some people, it's showing up more neurologically, others it's showing more up in their mitochondria and their ability to do things, and others just, in pain. Could that be a possibility?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, yes. But what I'm not sure is, it may well be the case that there are people with CIRS where the lymphatic system of the brain is draining just fine. And the problem is not that. The problem is that for whatever reason, and genetics is probably the primary reason, their body cannot handle these biotoxins.
Sorry, I was going to say, is it only those people that are genetically predisposed to not being able to handle the toxins that are susceptible or at risk for developing CIRS, or are there other factors?
That's the main factor, according to the person who kind of identified it and named it. So this is Dr. Richard Schumaker. In the late 1990s, he was working with a bunch of patients who had a particular type of mold exposure, locally in Maryland, I think. And he basically identified that the innate part of the immune system, which is the part that has the generalized systemic response, which is supposed to be an initial response, and then afterwards the adaptive immune system is supposed to kick in and do a more specific and localized job. So an innate immune response, which is generally what we call inflammation, is supposed to be temporary. But what Dr. Schumaker identified is, in this particular class of people who he was working with who had really suffered from this specific type of mold exposure, is that innate immune response seemed to be permanently switched on. There was no phasing into the adaptive immune response, where generally the innate response and the systemic inflammation would calm down. It would just carry on being in extremely high gear. So that's what he identified. He did primarily focus on mold toxins, which is why I'm using the term biotoxin. That's generally what it's referred to in that community. He did also look at Lyme disease as another one potentially. So again, that being a biotoxin, from I guess bacteria originally, and then viruses and stuff like that. So again, it's like natural toxins as opposed to man-made toxins. And his work was very important. I don't think that it is only mold, nor did he. But as I said, in his community, it is the primary thing that generally tends to be focused on.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, is it primarily mold as that factor, or is there other things that can also trigger this response?
Yeah, one of the things that does seem to be fairly unique or unusual about mold is that even though it's a natural thing that we should have adapted to, I guess, over evolution, just like bacteria. So they talk about, in a way, humans and bacteria, humans and viruses are kind of an arms race against each other. So we're kind of trying to keep up with things to kill them, but they're constantly trying to evolve in order to not be killed and to spread and all the rest of it. So the one thing about mold, as opposed to say heavy metals, which is something we've talked a lot about on this show as well, is that it is a living organism. It's a bunch of different living organisms, in fact. And so, and yeah, the idea of arms race, that sounded silly, but
no, it didn't sound silly. What I laughed because it's like, you're so correct. I mean, it's just like we're trying to beat each other to the punch here, yeah.
Yeah, and it's not humans versus all these microorganisms, just to be clear. They're constantly in an arms race with each other. That's the thing to understand. Famously penicillin, which was discovered on mold. So mold created a mycotoxin, which mold toxin, that killed bacteria, and then we happened to scoop that up and decide to repurpose it. But originally, it's because the mold was trying to kill the bacteria, right? Like that. And it's not molds versus bacteria as well. It's different bacteria versus each other, different molds versus each other as well, etc. They're all kind of fighting all the time if you look at it through one lens.
For survival. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, survival and proliferation. And so mycotoxins are particularly pernicious. And I think it's really Dr. Schumaker who helped to kind of discover that and make many more people aware about it. So why? Well, first of all, the way I just said, so they keep adapting. So even though you'd think, well, we'd be used to molds by now? Well, the mycotoxins keep changing, and they keep changing in a way that basically undermines the immune system of, let's say, the mammal, the human, and prevents it from working correctly. It's not the only thing that does that. For instance, Dr. Gundry, famously talks about how plants also create toxins called leptins, which he says, they kind of keep developing them in ways that are going to disrupt and mess with the immune system of the mammals who are eating them. So it's not unique to molds, but the molds and the mycotoxins that they create are particularly effective at destabilizing and dysregulating the human immune system. Probably more than anything else that's found in similar quantities in nature.
Is that just because that does make sense. Is it just because they have this penchant for adapting so well? What's the characteristic that makes them be that?
I don't think so, because I think bacteria as well are known to be very, very quick at adapting, viruses in their own way. So I don't know why why they have specifically focused on creating things that disrupt the immune systems of mammals so well, specifically, especially as with plants, it kind of makes more sense because they want to stop you eating too much of them, so they create these toxins that make it difficult to overeat them. With molds, who knows? I mean, maybe it's even just a side effect of them doing what they're doing, or maybe it's intentional. If there is such a thing as intention when it comes to mold, that's a whole other debate. But yeah, it's just the way that it is. And I guess maybe because it's not obvious why it would be that way, that's one of the reasons it took quite a while for this to really be discovered. Maybe.
Okay. Right. Well, yeah, because I would say, going on that point, many people might not know that their house has a mold issue. correct? So it's like almost in and of that cell thing where it's silent in a way, like people just don't know that it exists or that it's a potential danger.
And I need to make a distinction between mold and mycotoxins. So molds are these organisms that people can have allergies to. I mean, they're kind of gross, obviously. If you see them growing in your house or on your food, generally people are not happy. But the main reason that they're bad is not in and of itself because of their existing, and maybe the particles floating in the air are not so bad unless you happen to have an allergy. The problem is the different chemical compounds that they're creating. So they create various different gases as well, like for instance, VOCs, volatile organic compounds, which are known to be bad for you. And so one of the things that's monitored when they, assess air quality, if you go on one of those websites or apps to assess air quality in your area, it's one of the things that will come up, and different types of industrial pollutants will create various of those gases as well. But the thing that they create that's probably worse because of the volume of it that they create is these mycotoxins. And so, I just kind of explained what's so bad about them. They dysregulate the immune system. Another thing is that they dysregulate the nervous system more than most other toxins in the quantities that are regularly, around of these things. And then another issue is that they're fat soluble, which not all, they're not the only fat soluble toxins, but it's not as common as water soluble. And so, the nervous system, the brain especially, has a lot of fat in it compared to other parts of the body. And so this is one of the other reasons why it affects the nervous system so negatively. It's also one of the reasons it's so hard to deal with and get rid of, because water-soluble toxins, as horribly toxic as they are, if you just get rid of the exposure, very soon, in most cases, your body can clear them out. An example of this would be many pesticides. They're really toxic. They can literally kill you if you overdose on them, and that does happen in agricultural settings. But it's barely possible, but if you were able to just completely stop exposure of those pesticides, within a relatively short period of time, your body would have got rid of all of them. Like, it's not that difficult for the body in most cases. It does depend a bit, but some of the most well-known ones, well-known for being bad. In the case of biotoxins, in the amount commonly found, mycotoxins specifically, it takes the body a long time to get rid of them because they're fat soluble. So this is one of the other challenges with it. And so one of the first things, I'm skipping ahead a bit just for a second to illustrate this, but one of the first things that you deal with, obviously, with if the root of your problem is mold exposure, is reduce the exposure. But that's only the beginning. And although it is an essential step, you could still feel very sick for a very long time afterwards, months, sometimes even years. And that's because of the fat soluble nature of the toxins. So that's part of the problem as well. The other thing I wanted to say about mycotoxins, the other thing that makes them so bad, not only in the body, but in terms of practicalities, is the size of them is way, 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 way smaller than mold. And so they're so small that they can literally go through walls, similar to like a virus, that kind of size. And so what that means is you might be in a house or an apartment where you're walking around and everything looks pristine and spotless, and you might be like, no, Elwin, mold can't be the root of my health problems because I've never seen any mold here. It's always looked fine. But it may be growing in your basement, or it may be growing in your attic, or it may be growing between your walls, and you have no idea that it's there, and you don't see it and you don't smell it, but it's still able to, the mycotoxins themselves are still able to get into the environment. Now, it's a little bit case by case as to, I'm not saying they can necessarily get through all walls and all the rest of it, but at least they can. That's the point. So that may be what's going on. So that's the other specific thing about it. And so this is a real issue because let's say with lead, the toxicity that I suffered with most in the end. So even though I was diagnosed with CIRS and they thought I had mold toxicity, I had some mold, but it wasn't really the thing for me. But lead is relatively unusual these days. And one for humans to have such an excessive amount of it, as I have at least, it's still quite common in the environment. It's still way too common in our foods. It's way too common in our plates and cups and stuff like that. I'm not saying it's not around, but the amount of people who have so much mold in them that it makes them very sick is quite low these days compared to what I understand it was. And that's because when we realized how how bad lead was, we made some efforts to remove it. Some efforts, not enough, but some. And so therefore exposure is a lot less than it was. Mercury would be similar. That's another example. Again, I'm not saying it's perfect, but it was banned in a lot of uses, and so there's less of it than before. Again, depending on what country you are in, more or less. With mold, it's not something that we can decide to put less of in the food or create, as easily create laws around, they're only allowed to be so much of it in this industrial application or in this food or whatever. Like, it just grows on its own. And so actually, to be fair, I'm very critical of government usually, but, many governments actually have emphasized how toxic molds are. I know, for instance, in the UK, it is treated as a biohazard in the same category of asbestos. So that's in theory, that's according to the regulations and the laws. In practice, though, if you're renting and you go to a landlord and say, I found some asbestos, the landlord is much more likely to deal with that effectively than if you go, I found some mold. In my experience, if you tell them I found some mold, the worst case scenario, and most commonly, they're probably going to go, so what, like clean it up then. The best case scenario, they're going to go over there with a spray bottle and a cloth and like wipe it up. And the problem with that is it's a very ineffective form of what's called remediation in this community. What actually probably needs to be done is either like walls have to be knocked in and floorboards have to be pulled up and stuff like that, like to really find the root of it and to treat it effectively. Just a spray bottle of kitchen spray or whatever, or even bleach is not going to do it. In fact, all that does, because again, mold itself, mycotoxins are not living organisms, mold itself is. All that generally does is it upsets the mold. It releases loads more biotoxins into the air. It probably doesn't get rid of every trace of it, so it just grows right back again. And it's really not effective. And so there's different ways of dealing with it. When I thought this was the thing for me, I spent a lot of money doing this treatment to my whole house where they spray basically everything with this specific solution that is supposed to both kill the mold but also stop it growing back again. And that seems to be very effective. And I did feel somewhat better after that. I think that's maybe, I don't know, maybe a placebo effect. I think maybe, though, when your immune system is really struggling like mine was, if you remove all sources of mycotoxin, it still gives the immune system a nice break, even if it's not the root issue of your problem. So I think it's generally a good thing to do if you can afford it. So yeah, it's generally like a big thing to actually get rid of it. But yeah, the point I was making originally is, although it's supposed to be classified as a similar level of hazard as asbestos, it's generally not treated that way. And if you have a landlord, they're not going to want to deal with it in most cases. I heard something about how in the UK the regulations are changing to make it like easier for tenants to complain about mold and do something about it, which is kind of rare that there's a law in the UK that I think is a good one, but that does seem like a really good idea. So I hope that is implemented and really acted upon. And, throughout the rest of the world, it's case by case, depending on what country you're living in. And if you're in the US, depending on what state you're living in, it may or may not be treated seriously, but on average, it's not treated seriously. And if you're the owner of the house, then of course you don't have to have a landlord, but you have to face the idea of this may be something very expensive to deal with, and it may involve a lot of upheaval. As we said, we're talking about, it could be between walls, it could be underneath the floorboards, all this kind of stuff. So absolutely. I know people who've spent tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes more, to try and like deal with that. I've known people who've moved house, and that's the only thing that they could do in the end. And whether you actually really have to do that it's a matter of some debate. I'd say people who are very like in this community, the kind of CIRS community, would usually say that yes, right? Like you have to reduce the not just reduce, you have to remove the exposure. And generally, I do agree with that as a principle. It may be that you can get away with not doing so in specific circumstances, but overall, I say that even to people with foods. So, I deal with a lot more people with food allergies, and I say, like, you got to, for a while, just stop all the foods that your body is reacting to, just so your nervous system can actually calm down. And of course, you're going to deal with whatever the root problem is. Often it is some kind of toxin exposure. Often it is some kind of nutritional deficiency, usually some combination, maybe some other stuff. But yeah, like, as well as addressing all those root causes, if you allow the immune system to constantly have the exposure, it means that it never gets a chance to calm down or to go back into a regulated state. So this is something to consider. If you are sick all the time, I know there's loads of people. I was just reading through the forum Jacob's in recently, because he told me, have you seen what's happening? I was like, oh, let me have a look. And I was just reminded, there's so many people really struggling with their health, and having all kinds of reactions to all kind of things, and kind of bouncing between, it's this, it's that, it's copper, it's B1 deficiency, it's whatever, like thinking it's all of these different things. And they may be right in each of those cases, I don't know. But it may also be that the reason your body is so damn sensitive to this stuff, because there are plenty of people with, heavy metal toxins who don't even have symptoms. There are plenty of people with quite bad nutritional deficiencies who have no idea, who are not so sensitive and hyperreactive to everything. And so this may be a piece of the puzzle. And so this kind of philosophy, this idea, has not really been taken on by mainstream medicine. So if you go to your normal medical doctor and tell them, oh, I think all my problems are CIRS, they probably are not going to be willing to listen to you. Not definitely. Obviously, Dr. Miriam, who we've had on here a bunch, is a medical doctor who fully would understand this and be happy to investigate it with you, as one example. But I think in many cases, and that's because, of course, Dr. Miriam, as well as being a medical doctor, is also a functional medicine doctor. And I'd say, of all the different categories of practitioner, probably functional medicine is the one that has most embraced this concept of diagnosing people with CIRS. They've most embraced the idea of testing them for mycotoxins. Mycotoxin testing is available, tends to be pretty expensive. You have to do a urine test. There is also the issue that when you test it, a lot of the time they will say, actually, if you might have it really badly and it may not show up very high in your urine, because your body's not excreting it very well, because that's the whole point.
It's fat soluble. Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's fat soluble, and your immune system doesn't know how to deal with it because of this genetic thing. And so that's the other test that you can do, is to test the genes related to it. And so this may sound like a pitch for my own thing, but yeah, Genetic Insights, we tell you if you have a genetic susceptibility for both foodborne mold and for airborne mold. And we do also give you our reports on the various HLA genes, which are the ones that functional medicine doctors usually test. And it's these HLA SNPs variants that, if you have them, and around 25% of people have them, mean that you're not effective at it. And the thing to understand about why that's such a big deal, and when you asked me earlier what are the causes, and I said genetics is primary, Chrissy, is this. Because you could have a family 4 living in a house. Let's say, an archetypal one, mother, father, son, daughter. Maybe the father, the mother, and the son are all fine. Totally healthy, despite drinking, smoking, whatever it is, eating badly. And then you got the daughter, and she doesn't do any of that. And she tries to eat healthily, and she tries to do this and tries to do that. And she's just sick all the time, and she reacts to everything, and she has an issue. Now, in that particular case, the last thing you might think is, it's the house, it's the environment. Because, of course, the first thing you'd think, it's the same thing that I thought. I'm like, when I had this issue, it's like, it's not going to be something environmental, because if it was, then my wife would have had the same thing. And she didn't, right? So it's totally natural to feel that way. And so that's why it's so important to understand how big a difference genetics will make. Your house may be teeming with mold. And yet, for most people, unless they are really compromised anyway for some different reason, if they don't have this gene, they probably won't notice it. And yet, if they do have this gene, they can be devastated by it.
Genetic Insights provides cutting-edge, affordable DNA testing, giving you access to over 500 health reports that can help you in 3 key ways. They may be able to resolve your existing health challenges even when nothing else has worked. Using simple lifestyle changes, their reports can help you reduce your risk of developing future health challenges that you may be genetically predisposed to. And they can help you feel more confident in your health by showing you where you are genetically strong. Unlike most other genetic health testing companies, Genetic Insights tests over 83 million different variations in your genes, guaranteeing 99.7% accuracy across all of their DNA reports. They cover almost every aspect of health, including digestive issues, cardiovascular health, weight loss, hormonal and blood sugar balance, as well as nutrient needs, allergies and intolerances, and so much more. Using their system is quick and easy, and reading the reports is simple. If you've done an Ancestry DNA test, you can simply download your raw DNA data, upload it to the Genetic Insights platform, and within a few hours you will have access to genetic reports which give you a risk score for each specific issue and scientifically validated recommendations based on your individual genetic profile. Everything in your reports are based on scientific studies, and there are citation links throughout every report. If you are serious about optimizing your health and wellness and feeling great, then getting access to your Genetic Insights reports may be the most important health investment you will ever make. In the reports, not only will you gain insights into how to overcome existing health challenges and avoid future issues, you'll also discover which types of dietary, lifestyle, and even supplement protocols are best for your unique genetics. To get your unique genetic health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and use code REJUVENATE to get 20% off today. That's geneticinsights.co using coupon code REJUVENATE to get 20% off today. Right, okay. So I was going to say, if somebody is contemplating or thinks that they might have mold in their house, what's the first thing that they should do?
So yeah, that's a good question. Well, it's fairly easy to test, despite what I said about, mycotoxins traveling and stuff like that. You will still have some spores in the air, even if it is, underneath the floorboards or something like that. And so you can get these little Petri dishes test kits, and you can, and then you culture them. You basically just leave them, you collect for a certain amount of time, and then you culture them and you send them off to a lab, or you can just leave them to culture yourself, depending on where you're getting them from and what the instructions are. And basically, one way or another, you'll get a result. The ones that you ship off are usually a lot more expensive, but a lot more effective, because they'll also tell you how much there is of them and what type there is, because some types are way worse than others. That's to just directly answer your question, as I have a tendency to do. But if the question was, how can I tell if I am being negatively impacted by mold, as opposed to, whether I have some in the house, there's a couple of different ways. So first of all, the genetic testing that I just said, you can get it from Genetic Insights. You can also get it from any functional medicine practitioner these days, pretty much, although Genetic Insights, I would say, is a lot cheaper. One way or another, they will be able to tell you if you have this genetic susceptibility. So that's like really crucial information. Even without spending any money, though, you can also ask yourself the question, do I feel better when I'm in another environment? And so this is often one of the first clues that I hear from different people is, I got sick ever since I moved to that house. That's a common one that I've heard as well. And I've heard people blame other stuff like, I don't know, geopathic stress or, this and that. And I'm like, yeah, maybe. But all of that is, you could even say CIRS and mycotoxin illness is quite speculatory. And I guess it is in terms of CIRS, but the detrimental impact of mold and mycotoxins is not speculation. As I said, it's codified into law of most countries. It's quite mainstream how toxic molds and mycotoxins can be. Whereas if we're talking about geopathic stress or 5G radiation and stuff like that, There's some evidence for it. I'm not dismissing it, but I'm saying it's more speculative. That's all. So I would start with the stuff that's the most obvious, and I would put, mold in that category. So just generally, if you feel worse in one place and then better in another place, that's one potential clue. Now, especially if that place that you're in, has mold, or if it is the kind of place that there would be mold. So now, if you know that's simple, but would have mold, what does that mean? If it's a damp environment, like outside in general, so all of England, for instance, falls into this category, England, Wales, etc. More than if you lived in, say, Arizona. Now, if you live in Arizona, it's still possible because you could have had a leak somewhere in the house that you didn't see, and then mold can still be building up there. So it's not impossible if you live in the desert, but it's less likely than if you live in a cold, damp environment, like, the UK, for instance. So if you felt better in the desert, worse in a cold, damp environment, that would be a clue potentially. If you felt worse in a house where you can see mold, better in a house that you don't see mold, that would be another obvious clue potentially. So that's kind of the free thing. And then, the most expensive and probably time-consuming option, but possibly the most definitive, although I'll explain how to make it more definitive in a second, would be to do that urinary mycotoxin test. Because even if they may not show super high, if your body is not detoxifying very well, there'll still be some rather than none. Now, the other thing that you could do is you could actually, and I don't see this recommended anywhere near often enough, is to actually do like a protocol as if you had mold, and then do the testing. Then do the urinary testing. Because if you do that, it really should show up if you actually have it.
Right, because you're bringing it out. You're taking it out of the body. So therefore, when you're tested, it should be showing up.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's really no downside to that because, to me, at least short to medium term, because a lot of the recommendations, the classic recommendations in things like the Schumaker Protocol for detoxifying these biotoxins is the same recommendations as how to, for instance, address cholestasis and toxic bile, which we've talked about before. Toxic bile being a theory, cholestasis being a standard medical thing. Basically, if the bile is not flowing well, then there are certain things you can do to improve the bile flowing, and then there are certain things you can do to bind the bile and stop it being reabsorbed. Called binders. In the Schumaker Protocol, actually cholestyramine. I believe that Schumaker was the first one to identify cholestyramine for this purpose. Cholestyramine before, I believe, was used more to lower cholesterol, though it wasn't used very much because the medical establishment decided that other drugs are more effective, but that's what it was originally licensed for. And I believe it was him who at least popularized the idea of repurposing it for the mechanism of stopping your body reabsorbing the bile and the toxins that go along with the bile. So your liver creates bile, then it goes from the gallbladder, if you have one, to the intestines. And your intestines are this very long, thin tube with around 150 different corners. And the point of the intestines, one of the main points of the intestines is to absorb stuff, specifically nutrients, although, really the point of it should be to screen what to absorb and what not to absorb, but it doesn't always get that right. And the body generally reabsorbs the bile because there's a bunch of important nutrients in the bile. But the bile is also the main route that your body uses to get rid of the really toxic toxins. Not the only one, but the main one. And so your body is reabsorbing that bile because generally throughout most of our evolution, nutrients were scarce. And as I said, there's a bunch of nutrients in bile. And so your body tends to reabsorb at least 90% of the bile, but then it reabsorbs the toxins as well. So if you use something called a binder, it stops your body from reabsorbing the bile. And probably the best value and overall best choice for a bile binder to stop your body reabsorbing it for most people is activated charcoal, because it's very cheap, very safe, very easy to get. But the one that was preferred by Dr. Schumaker was cholestyramine, which is not as cheap, not as easy to get, and potentially not even as safe. But it does have 100% bile adsorption capacity, unlike every other binder. So it really stops your body completely from reabsorbing any bile that it gets near. And so doing that protocol of stopping your body reabsorbing bile temporarily in this world where a lot of people are suffering with excess toxicity, plus doing a protocol that increases the flow of bile in this world where a lot of people, in my opinion, have cholestasis. I think cholestasis is one of the early root causes of cardiovascular disease, which is one of the biggest diseases in the world, that kills more people than pretty much anything. So doing a protocol that involves those two elements, which are some of the central elements of the CIRS protocol, is a very good idea. Another aspect of the CIRS protocol, which I think this is more variable as to what's recommended. The other two I just said are the classics, is also sweating. Sweating has been shown to be very effective at getting toxins out, even mycotoxins. And so, adding that to the protocol as well for most people, as long as they do it correctly, make sure they don't deplete them. If you're already very depleted in nutrients, then sweating a lot will make you even more depleted in nutrients. So you have to be on top of the nutrients as well. And we'll talk about this in a sec, Chrissy. I'll go through all 7 parts of the Rejuvenate Blueprint. But I'm just giving the overview first, like in terms of stuff that people have already heard of, probably in relation to this particular diagnosis. So as long as you're doing it correctly, sweating as well. And sweating does not only excrete toxins out of the body through the skin pores, which saves them having to go through the whole liver, bile, gallbladder, intestinal process. It can just go straight out through the sweat. But also being in high heat encourages your body to release more toxins into the lymph and move the lymph. So basically doing like sweating, for instance, before you do that mycotoxin urine test will, if you do it a few hours before, there'll tend to be, if you have them, more toxins in the urine. So it also is a useful thing to help to diagnose it. So basically, probably the ideal scenario to be utterly sure would be to do such a protocol, which, as I say, is probably a good idea for anyone suffering from toxicity anyway. And then after having done it for a bit, 2 to 4 weeks, say, then doing the mycotoxin urine test and seeing if there is evidence that, there is significant amounts of one or more mycotoxins that may be the root of your symptoms.
Right. Okay. So first things first, essentially, you've got to stop the exposure. And then the next bit is then looking at these protocols of being able to support the body to get rid of the mycotoxins by having that bile go to a binder so that your body can actually get it out of the system. But there's a lot of other things that you can do in that process. I will make sure that for the Rejuvenate podcast episodes you've mentioned, they will be links in the description below. So please click on that link so that you can see those links to those previous episodes, because we go into a lot more detail of those processes in case there's any information or questions that you may have. Okay, perfect. Elwin, shall we take it to the Rejuvenate Blueprint and work it through there?
Yes, but just for that, let me add a couple of other things that are part of that standard protocol, and then we'll definitely get into that. So a couple of other things so that's kind of like the first thing. There's kind of 2 other things which are often part. He has a whole 12-step process, but I've narrowed it down to 3 basic things. So the first,
is this the Schumaker Protocol?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first thing is all the stuff I just said. The second thing they also look at is that, not always, but a lot of the time, is that these molds, if they're especially in the environment, they may not only be in the external environment, they may be the internal environment. They may have colonized you, in other words. And this is one of the other problems. Let's say you do that, the thing about, okay, I'm going to move to Arizona and a new build house that definitely hasn't any leaks or whatever. So I know it's not mold in the house. Okay. But then you may not get better. Why not? One of the reasons, obviously, your body's still overloaded with toxins, but even then you might not get better. Many people don't. Why not? And so then it was looked into and discovered, the molds have also colonized you. And so the main 2 areas where they may have colonized you are the respiratory system, especially the sinuses, but also the lungs, and then the intestinal system. as well. And so, speaking of symptoms, which I know we didn't maybe fully go into, but as well as, the endocrine and neurological and stuff like that, the classic symptoms as well are respiratory. Often there's sinus issues, often there's persistent cough, for instance, or breathing difficulties and stuff like that. And often there's digestive issues. Those could be there even if your body hasn't been colonized by mold, but it definitely is, a suspicion that might be the case in that case. And so they often refer to MARCONS, which stands for multiple antibiotic resistant coagulase negative staphylococci. And so this is another thing. So that's a bacteria, but that's another thing that's considered if it has colonized the sinuses specifically, and also sometimes the lungs. It often works along with molds. And so as well as doing all of the stuff to detoxify, they often use stuff like a BEG spray, for instance, which is an antibiotic, or some kind of herbal version, like maybe containing oregano oil and grapeseed extract and xylitol, stuff like that, to spray up the nose regularly to help to clear away any infection of the sinuses, and as well as all the antitoxin agents that we talked about earlier, like cholestyramine in the intestines. They may also, again, use some kind of maybe nystatin, or sometimes even terbinafine, or some kind of pharmaceutical antifungal, sometimes a herbal antifungal, again, grapeseed extract or neem oil or something like that. And then some kind of antibacterial, whether it's like rifaximin in terms of pharmaceuticals, or again, oregano oil, garlic, anything like that, as a allicin, I guess, more than garlic. Allicin being the active ingredient in garlic that kills bacteria, to kill those organisms that may have proliferated as a result of the immune system being compromised, or as a reason why the immune system is compromised, or both. And it's often both.
I was going to ask, because what would we have had to have done, or what would have had to have occurred for the mold to be able to colonize internally?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, the immune system would have to be compromised to some degree. Why would an immune system be compromised? How long is a piece of string? There are lots of answers for that. But one of the reasons is because there is some kind of chronic infection that the body hasn't been able to get rid of. So we've given a few examples of that. Another reason could be any kind of toxin, including heavy metals, pesticides, whatever. It could be nutritional deficiencies. It could be chronic stress. It could be lack of sleep. I mean, yeah, it could be loads and loads of different things. And of course, there could be that genetic susceptibility, which is significant as well. So, as I say, how long is a piece of string in terms of all the things it could be? But in terms of, when you're actually trying to help people, often you can't focus on everything it could be. So you try and narrow down what's the most likely culprits. And so some of the things I've listed there, I think, would be most likely, chronic infections, molds, heavy metals. Those would probably be the first things that you would look at. And I would look at, and I don't feel necessarily it's looked at enough, also nutritional deficiencies. Because if you're too low in zinc, for instance, if you're too low in even some of the B vitamins, if you're too low in, I could name them all, I guess, any of the nutrients. But let's say, magnesium, maybe those would be the few that I'd start off with if I had limited budget or whatever. Then that could mean that the whole immune system doesn't work correctly, even if, the exposure really wasn't the issue always. And then, light environment and stress levels and sleep and all kinds of other things that you could potentially look at that don't cost money to optimize for the client. And so I mentioned earlier that, it primarily affects the immune system, the neurological system, and the endocrine system. We've talked a reasonable amount about the first two, but endocrine system, what does that mean? It means glands and it means hormones. And so that's the other thing that it can often mess with, is the hormones. So all the kind of usual suspects that we talk about here a lot, like the thyroid and the adrenals and progesterone and testosterone, all that kind of thing, absolutely can and are affected by this. Some of the molds, the mycotoxins, like zearalenone, off the top of my head, I remember, is highly estrogenic. So a person can be very estrogenic in terms of their presentation and how they feel and all the rest of it. And it may not be an excess of estrogen. It may actually be a mold toxicity that's causing that. So that's something to be aware of as well. And therefore, functional medicine practitioners working with this, they quite often support people hormonally. I've seen often they recommend to give DHEA in general, sometimes pregnenolone as well, although less commonly. And I've often seen them give progesterone to women and or testosterone to men. There's one other hormone that's very important. Actually, there's several, but one I'll focus on that isn't talked about as much, including by me, and that's alpha MSH, melanocyte stimulating hormone. So this is another pituitary hormone that's kind of like a root cause kind of hormone that then has lots of kind of cascading effects downstream. In the peptide world, this is sometimes known because there are pieces of this that are often sold for various purposes. So, for instance, melanotan is a piece of that, and it's the thing that helps to increase melanin production, as well as reducing appetite, increasing sex drive, and reducing inflammation. So those are some of the things. There's a piece of that in turn called KPV, which is just 3 amino acids, which is a strong anti-inflammatory compound. And I say all that not for the sake of trivia, but to say that those two peptides, peptide / hormones, alpha MSH, and then as well KPV, are often recommended and given by some functional medicine practitioners to people with this issue, and they swear that it helps. In fact, just speaking with Dr. Miriam a couple of weeks ago, and she was talking about how she loves to use KPV for people who do have that chronic inflammatory response syndrome. She finds it to be very effective, and she's not the only one. I'm just giving her as an example. So basically, when you have mycotoxin, or this, let's say this CIRS, your body often undermakes this alpha MSH. And so that could, as well as creating high inflammation, that could also lead to a lack of all the other things I just talked about. It can mean increased appetite, although not always, depending on if your body has an adrenal response. It can lead to a lack of sunlight tolerance, and it can lead to a reduced sex drive because of this lack of alpha MSH either being produced or being able to act appropriately. So that's interesting. Another hormone that we don't talk about much, which is effective significantly, is ADH, which is antidiuretic hormone, also known as vasopressin. And this is significant because one of the other because a lot of the symptoms, I didn't even bother listing them because it's kind of always all the same. You take the symptoms of, CIRS and compare it to the symptoms of like hypothyroidism, there's like an 80% overlap. You take the symptoms of supposedly candida toxicity, and there's like an 80% overlap. So I haven't really given a full list of all the usual symptoms. But there's a few things about the mold toxicity which are more specific. So first of all is neurological issues, like we talked about. Second is, unexplainedly being estrogenic, like we talked about. Another one is obviously just having that severe immune reaction to everything, like we've already talked about, that's really unexplainable. But a couple of other things. So one of them is need to pee frequently. And that's because the mycotoxins mess with vasopressin, which is this antidiuretic hormone. And so I've seen some functional medicine practitioners prescribe and give people vasopressin temporarily to help to make up for that. Not a good idea to just buy it and do it yourself, but that might be why a practitioner would recommend it to you. It's not a good idea to do it because your body needs to pee a certain amount. If you're waking up to pee at night, it may be adrenaline, it may be low blood sugar, it may be prostate issues, it may be loads of other things, but it can be a lack of vasopressin. If it is getting support with some vasopressin temporarily can help. And the other hallmark of mycotoxins, off the top of my head, as well, they talk about that's quite unique to mycotoxin and CIRS specifically, is little feelings of electrical shocks seeming to come from nowhere and being very sensitive to static electricity. So if you tend to get shocked a lot more severely and a lot more often, like static electric shocked, that kind of thing that you get sometimes, that is another hallmark. And if you just have, not necessarily you touched anything, but just kind of weird electrical feelings in your body that seem to be coming out of nowhere, It could be other stuff, especially a bunch of other vague medical diagnoses, but that's a good indicator potentially of CIRS as well. And then the last treatment thing, again, a peptide I'll just mention quickly before we go into my list. This is all the mainstream stuff I've been telling you up until now, which I don't really disagree with any of it, but I'd add some stuff. Is that when a person is a lot better, and often this takes time. They usually tell you it would take at least 6 months, but I think privately when I talk to practitioners, that's probably a year or two of really following the protocols, what you need to start feeling a lot better in reality. But eventually you do get better if you just stick with it. But sometimes it's only to a degree, and your body's still in a kind of reactive state, even though the toxin is no longer there. And in that case, practitioners sometimes use a peptide called vasoactive intestinal polypeptide, usually shortened to a VIP peptide, usually as a nasal spray. And that can be completely unhelpful or make people worse in a certain condition. But if you've had this chronic illness for a long time, if you've addressed the root cause, but the immune system is still being reactive for no reason, then this VIP, many people say, is very effective at just getting the immune system to calm down. If you take it and it doesn't work, I think the general idea is it's because you haven't actually really addressed the root issue yet. But if you have addressed the root issue and you try it, then it can be very effective.
Okay, so those are a great list of all the mainstream things to look at if you have CIRS. Then you said you had your list. So do you want to tell us all about that?
Yeah, absolutely. For every certainly chronic and possibly even acute health condition under the sun, I find if I refer to the same basic 7 root causes, then we can always find what's going on. And so everything I've just talked about is covered under one of those 7. But I thought I'd give the original list first of what's most standardly recommended. Then I'll add a few things based on my own list. So nutrient deficiencies. I don't find them to be ignored in the CIRS community. I wouldn't want to go that far, but I would say that they're possibly de-emphasized. And so I would strongly recommend that, in addition to all the stuff we've talked about, as a primary thing, it's usually one of the first things I look at the state of nutritional deficiencies. Because 2 things. Even if you don't think a nutritional deficiency has or could cause such a serious problem, which I would disagree with, but even if you believe that, such a serious problem can cause a nutritional deficiency. Because if you think about it, if the whole nervous system, endocrine system, immune system is so dysregulated, and usually along with that comes the digestive system, is it not possible that your body would end up really low in some kind of nutrient, either because your body isn't digesting and absorbing it very well, or because your body is using it up at an accelerated rate? And then that nutritional deficiency is going to cause a bunch of its own symptoms and problems, which, including a lack of ability to fix all the other stuff. So I think it's really, really important. This is the mainstream list that I looked up, and they've got selenium, iron, vitamin C, all the B vitamins, magnesium, zinc, folate, L-carnitine, and coenzyme Q10. I actually agree with all of those. They also list here essential fatty acids, with the idea being that, if you have the right ratio of omega-3 to omega-6, it will help to regulate the immune system and stop it being in such an inflammatory state. Not usually a fan these days of supplementing omega-3s, but to be honest, there are some cases where I would be, and this might be one of them. If you don't have a reaction to EPA and DHA, and often people do because they react to everything when they're on CIRS pretty much, but if you don't, it may be a good idea because it does reduce that inflammatory response. Some people have their school of thought is it does that by suppressing the immune system, and so it's not good. That's obviously a fringe theory, but I know a lot of people who are watching this maybe do believe that. But even if you believe that, just to temporarily calm that immune system down by any means necessary may be called for. So I would be a fan of foods with EPA and DHA in that case, if you can tolerate them. And so what do you do about that? I mean, pretty simple. I won't go through it all again, but look into foods and or supplements that help you replenish those ones. As I said, I think all of those are relevant. And ideally, and really, I would do this, test to see which ones you're actually low in. Tests are not 100% reliable, but they are way better than just guessing based on symptoms or anything else. So that's number 2 in the Rejuvenate Blueprint. I've kind of skipped over number 1 because number 1 is genetic factors, and we've already talked about
We've kind of
those.
discussed that. Yeah, exactly. And you guys know where to go get those if you haven't done already.
Number 3 in the Rejuvenate Blueprint, of course, is excesses, specifically excesses of toxins. So we've pretty much covered all of that as well. And so, I think, so remove exposure, increase bile flow, decrease bile reabsorption, increase sweating. Those would be like the fundamental things I would do. And that aligns pretty much exactly with what's usually recommended. So that one's pretty simple to talk about as well. Hormonal imbalances. So, as I said, the most common imbalances that are usually focused on are vasopressin, DHEA, estrogen, testosterone, usually estrogen too high, testosterone too low, DHEA too low, cortisol too high. So actually, I probably should have said that better. Generally, cortisol too high, DHEA too low is what you'll tend to see. Some other factors could confound that, like for instance, if you have PCOS, that can shift that. But all other things being equal, it will tend to be DHEA too low, cortisol too high. And then similarly, estrogen too high and testosterone and or progesterone too low. Those would be the classic things. And so how do you address that? Well, long term, hopefully, unless you're just so old like I am, that there are no other choices to have it optimal other than to support your body. But if you're young enough, by addressing everything, hopefully you can get to a point where your body can have optimal levels of all those things naturally. If you are older, for instance, then adding in some progesterone as a woman especially, and maybe testosterone as a man, might make sense because you're just never going to have the levels of a 25-year-old if you're 50 plus, say. It's just the way it is. And then I think I have another hormone listed here. Oh, yeah, thyroid. I haven't really talked much about that because I talk about it so much. But supporting optimal energy production is crucial. So I haven't really addressed this, but one of the ways that mycotoxins are so damaging is they stop your body from detoxifying them and every other toxin. So that's a really big problem. But another way that they are so damaging is because they interfere with mitochondrial energy production. And so taking thyroid will not automatically fix that. But if your thyroid is low, then your metabolism is going to be low. And if your metabolism is low, then your ability to create mitochondrial energy and your ability to detoxify is already limited just by that. And if you then stack on top of it, and now it's also limited by this toxin that's stopping it from working correctly, then you're making things even more difficult for yourself. And unfortunately, getting rid of the toxin is not particularly easy, as I've explained. Supporting your body, ideally temporarily, to increase metabolism by supporting the thyroid if necessary, is often a good idea. And so that's a lot easier than getting rid of the toxin. As I said, hopefully it would be temporary if the only reason why it's low is because of the toxin. But yeah, that would be a good idea in that case as well. So I think that's hormone. I mean, I know I'm really skimming a lot of these subjects, but that's because we've talked about them a lot in other episodes.
No, but that's it's really great to go back to the steps because that's how we help break it down. That's how we help understand. And also too, where you can identify, again, going back to the importance of nutrients. And I loved what you said here, that maybe, yes, a nutritional deficiency could potentially have caused this, but if it hasn't and it's another cause, well, having this can also produce nutritional deficiency. So that is something you really have to take into consideration, especially if you want to get better. So you may be doing the protocol to get rid of the CIRS, but if you're not on top of your nutrition, one, you may not get better, or two, it could take a lot longer. So it's like you really want to go through the steps and make sure you're addressing everything.
Yes, yeah. And let's give a couple of more steps then. So number 5 of the Rejuvenate Blueprint chronic disease root causes is lifestyle factors. This is probably the broadest category of all, although I don't spend much time on it. So lack of sleep, absolutely is going to mean your body is not detoxifying as much or as effectively, and your immune system isn't working as well. That's a given. Excess of stress, same thing. Doesn't mean you can never do anything difficult, but it means if day in, day out, you're persistently high stress, your immune system's not going to work as well. Nothing's going to work as well. That's that. Light environment, we've talked about a lot recently in recent episodes. Again, we talked about alpha MSH earlier. And so, your body needs sunlight to stimulate that as well. Now, the confounding thing about all of what I just said, which makes it so difficult, and which is, I realize it's generic advice, is if you have mycotoxin toxicity, often your circadian rhythm is disrupted, your stress is going to be high, and your ability to sleep is going to be low. So it's almost impossible to follow that advice, but you can at least follow it as best you can, right? So yes, maybe you find it really difficult to get 7 to 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep, but at least don't be like, I don't know, pushing yourself late at night to get work done, or, taking things at night, like having caffeine just before you go to bed, which I know for some people it works, but or having alcohol before you go to bed, like anything that disrupts your sleep. If you know it disrupts your sleep, then don't do it. Like, I realize it's already difficult to sleep, and it's probably already difficult to relax, but don't on purpose do things that make it even more difficult. I guess that's the advice that I would give in terms of lifestyle stuff. And then movement, lack of movement. Your body requires movement in order to detoxify, for the whole lymphatic system to work properly and to drain. And then the other lifestyle thing that I would give is, structural. If your body is all bent out of shape for various different reasons, injuries or whatever, maybe even emotional issues, then that will increase the stress of the body. That will decrease the ability to sleep. That will decrease the body's ability to digest properly, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it may sound a little bit like off topic, but actually doing something which helps to align the structure of your body, skeletons, muscles, tendons, joints, all the rest of it, can be a crucial factor because of all the knock-on consequences of not doing that, if that's a thing for you, which it is for many people, but certainly not everyone. Now, in terms of the environment, I guess we could have covered this under toxins, but I'll just put it in here while I remember it. Oh yeah, because I said earlier that you may not have to remediate or escape the exposure. If, obviously it's the better thing to do. But if you really can't, you're poor, you've just got this place, you can't escape, probably the best thing that you can do is to get and I realize again this costs money, but it's a very good investment, high quality air purifier. And probably more than one if there's more than one space that you spend time, and have it running constantly at high level pretty much. And if it's a really good quality one, and it has to be a really good quality one to filter out mycotoxins. Generally, if you get the grade that claims to filter out viruses, then that's the level that you need. Viruses and mycotoxins are similar size. So you need one. Most of your standard HEPA filter air purifier that you can get from the shop won't do that. But if you look for one that specifically will, that is effective even at these very, very small particle sizes, that can substantially make you feel better even if you're still in the house. Now, or the flat. Obviously, it's not ideal to constantly have a space be flooded with toxins and constantly have to pay a machine to filter them out again. But I'm saying if you cannot leave the space that you're in that's making you ill, it is the only real alternative is to be constantly filtering that air with a high quality of air filter. And ideally, you would fix the environmental leave and do the air filter, because when your immune system is highly reactive, it's more likely to react to all kinds of things that are naturally in the environment. But, again, may be outside of a lot of people's reach. I'm talking about the air purifier. Usually you're talking about $500 plus, which is a lot of money for an air purifier. I get it. But compared to selling your house or compared to moving home, or compared to remediating your home, which is probably the most expensive of all, as I talked about, it's the cheapest option. And so I'm not saying it's the best option. I'm saying actually it's the cheapest option, even though it seems like a lot of money to significantly reduce that exposure. How much will it reduce it exactly? It depends on all kinds of factors. Depends on how many mycotoxins are in the air, depends on how big the space is, how effective the air purifier is, how much time you spend in there. There's all kinds of factors. But if it's a really good one and you really commit to running it all the time, it should be reducing it by at least 90%. So it's still a massive improvement in terms of the amount that your immune system's constantly being assaulted with from the outside, if that is your situation. So in terms of environment, I know it's not quite what this step is usually supposed to be about, but I thought I'd mention it there. That's a really good way of addressing that as well. And then secondarily, just on the subject of, I guess, environment issues as well, food, just avoid foods that are known to often have high levels of mold in them, or other toxins, but let's say mold specifically. Probably the most obvious culprits would be peanuts, are known for having a specific mold in them, and coffee and chocolate. Those would probably be the top contenders. But really, generally any kind of seed that is old, so that includes grains, beans, nuts, when I say that is old, how many people are buying fresh wheat, but but I'm also talking about cardamom, and I'm talking about sunflower, any of kind of seeds, grains, etc. They are more likely to be contaminated. So you can look it up, foods that tend to be higher mold, that tend to be lower mold. If you're very susceptible, I would consider trying at least eliminating the top contenders. You can these days, especially in the case of coffee, you can find coffee that has been proven to be low in mycotoxins, then that's fair enough. But unless it's proven to be low, just assume that it is high with all of those like high risk foods. And so that would be another thing, like exposure thing, that's potentially making it worse.
Okay, so that's a really great rundown of going through the steps. I mean, I love that you're also throwing in that air purifier, because that does give potentially people an ability to help with their environment, like you said, especially if they can't get away from it.
And it's very useful to have. I think I've said this in a previous episode, but people way over focus on the toxicity in what they eat, and they way under focus on the toxicity in the air. And yeah, it is a cost to get an air purifier like I'm talking about. But if it's a good one like that, it should last several years. I mean, the one that I got lasted 5 years now. But let's say if it only lasts, 3 years on average, that's 1,000 days. So if it's $500, 1,000 days, that's 50 cents a day. Now think about how much it costs to buy, for instance, organic foods and drinks rather than non-organic foods and drinks per day. It's a lot more than 50 cents. But I would make the argument for anyone, and especially someone who this is the issue, that you're better off cleaning the air than you are, spending that money on getting organic versions of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So now that we've gone through that list, what's the next step, Elwin?
Well, next step is step 6. So that's chronic infections. We've talked about that a lot already. So just a quick, like the most commonly focused on usually is Lyme disease, Marcons, which is a type of staphylococcus, especially found in the respiratory system, and other tick-borne diseases. I would add in this category, the classic Candida infection would probably be an example, SIBO as well. But Candida specifically, because yeast, fungus, and mold are all kind of very similar, and your immune system treats them pretty similarly. And so if you do have an overgrowth of Candida or something like it in the reproductive system or the digestive system, that's definitely not going to help with chronic inflammatory response syndrome. Really any infection, but especially those. So I would add those to the category as well. And what do you do about it? Well, we have whole episodes on this. The only thing I'd add, on top of all the usual herbal or natural antibiotics and antifungals, and on top of all the usual advice of supporting your immune system, is that ozone therapy may be something worth considering in this specific case, and is often used in this case. So you don't want to breathe ozone in, but there's IV ozone therapy, which often people feel better with if they use it when they have this issue. Some people do it as well in an enema. Some people do ozonated oil, so then they're doing it in their digestive tract. And then, of course, ozone itself is not 100% effective at clearing an environment, but it's a cheap, like you can buy an ozone machine for less than $50, and you can run it in a room that has mold, and then you got to air it out afterwards because ozone is toxic in its own way. But once you've done that, you will you'll substantially reduce the level of toxicity in that room for a while. Ozone is also very effective at cleaning any kind of pathogens out of the air and the surfaces in a room. But they'll come back, is the problem. And the ozone, I don't believe it penetrates the walls, or it doesn't do that sufficiently enough that it's going to kill the mold that's the other side of the wall, unfortunately. But ozone treatment probably is the most budget way of cleaning out a room, at least temporarily, of the things that may be bothering you. Although remember, don't breathe in the ozone, you've got to clean it out afterwards. And then the last category, and actually this one is often not focused on by most practitioners, but it actually is in this world, is emotional and psychological factors. And this is recognized in this world. I could have mentioned it actually earlier in the kind of normal treatment things. So there's something called DNRS, or Dynamic Neural Retraining System, which basically says that when you start reacting to things, it's a real, everything I eat, every chemical I smell, everything, which is often the case with people with CIRS, including Jordan Peterson, who we talked about earlier. I remember, he was on Joe Rogan's show, and he said he had a bit of apple cider vinegar and he couldn't sleep for 6 weeks or something like that. Honestly, even when I heard that, that's all classic CIRS to me. It's taken them years. I actually had a conversation with him once, and unfortunately he did not listen to anything I said, but why would he? I was one of probably 1,000 people he'd spoken to that year. But I knew that, probably, I'm sure I wasn't the only one. I'm sure there was a bunch of people who knew that extreme level of reactivity. CIRS is not a given, but it's a high level of, it should definitely be investigated at that point. Anyway, so there is a real biochemical basis for it. It's not all in your head. However, when you start having those experiences, like Dr. Peterson documented, if all I did is drink a bit of apple cider vinegar and I couldn't sleep for 6 weeks, what do you think your brain starts doing? Do you think it would start going into hypervigilance? Like, oh my God, what's the next thing that's going to, make me not be able to sleep, or make me have severe fatigue, or make me have severe anxiety, or make me have severe pain, or whatever it might be? Like, your brain, and especially your limbic system, goes into this really hypervigilant state of feeling like everything's a threat. And I've been in that position myself. I've had clients who are in that position, and I understand it's very difficult to get out of it. And so this DNRS, the idea of it is, it's kind of like, to be honest, it's like doing a little magic ritual every day, but you're basically like, almost reminds me of it's like you're exercising like bad thoughts, but that's kind of what it reminded me of. Maybe that's only me. But it's kind of NLP kind of stuff. It's kind of retraining your brain to stop reacting to things. And the creator of it is very passionate about it. And she talked about her own thing where I think she ended up having to live in a tent in the wilderness or something like that, because she was literally reacting to everything, not just foods, but every chemical in the environment and all the rest of it. And she realized that in the end, that although it wasn't all her imagination or anything, a lot of it was just based on her limbic system being overactive. So she created this system to calm her limbic system down, and then she taught it to other people, and that's this whole system in a nutshell. They have all kinds of copyright and stuff about that, so that's why I'm giving my interpretation of it, not describing it, because I think I'm not allowed to describe it. But anyway, so that's an example of where that's already recognized in that kind of treatment, that's often, a thing that's recommended. I personally didn't find it effective. I know other people who didn't find it effective, but I don't believe that a bunch of people have. So I think it's case by case. I think it depends, honestly, how much of the action is limbic or not. The people like myself, who I noticed it didn't really work for, the people who are already quite in control of their own minds, meaning they're not spinning out and going into a full thing for no reason. They may be doing it, but because their body's actually reacting to something. And so what I found in that case with those people is when you deal with the actual problem, like the toxin usually and nutritional deficiency, then they stop going into that state. Sometimes it's a case of retraining the brain. Sometimes it's a case of retraining the biochemistry. depending on what it is. But anyway, sometimes it's retraining the brain. So then those kind of techniques to retrain the brain, like DNRS, or honestly, cognitive behavioral therapy, NLP, any of those kind of treating the brain like a machine and kind of reprogramming it kind of techniques can be, very, very effective. Any kind of technique that gets you to calm down, to be honest. So, meditation, kind of guided visualizations that call themselves meditations. To be honest, I put Joe Dispenza's work in that category, though I found it very, very good personally. But again, everyone's different. Honestly, though, I'll say my honest experience, the number one thing that I found that was effective for me for this was, kind of working more on the biochemical area, but it really had a big impact on my emotions. And I learned this from a guy called Dr. Christopher Shade, who is the founder of Quicksilver Scientific. And I believe it's not just self-described as the world's foremost mercury expert. I know that Tony Robbins, for instance, went to him when he had mercury poisoning, or he helped him identify mercury poisoning and treat it, something like that. And he said that in his experience, when he had clients come who were just reactive to everything, the number one most effective thing that he found was CBD. And I have to say,
why was that? Why do you think that was so effective?
Well, I'll tell you in the form of my own story. So I had to say, when I first heard that, I thought it was nonsense. I used to use cannabis in my teens and 20s. Then I became really down on it and really disliked it. And if I smell it on people's breath, I don't even want to deal with them. I usually leave the room. Like, I'm really anti it. So when I started seeing all the CBD stuff, and then people using it, it just seemed to sedate them, and I was really not very impressed. And the spiritual teacher I used to listen to said, you may think that all these things are great and they're enlightening you, but ask yourself a question: would you want your surgeon or your pilot to be using them? And if the answer is no, that it's not really a good thing after all. And I think that's a good point. So, for all these reasons and many more, I was not keen on the idea. But, Dr. Shade also did good work on teaching about the bile binding and the liver flowing and stuff like that. He called undoing cholestasis phase-free detoxification, which I thought was an interesting way of classifying it, because there's usually phase 1 and phase 2, which is making the toxins water soluble and then conjugating them, binding them to something within the liver before they get excreted. So the idea of phase 3, then you still got to get it out of the body. I thought that's a clever way of putting it. So anyway, he had credibility with me for a bunch of other reasons. And so I tried his one. I tried the Quicksilver liposomal CBD. And it's not available anymore for whatever reason, but that's what was there at the time. And I was really, really impressed at how effective it was for 3 different things in my case. First of all, it was really effective at calming me down. I had tried all kinds of things with using techniques like a heart rate variability monitor and just a heart rate, and heart, what's it called? Yeah, maybe it is heart rate variability monitor, just to assess stress. And I would do meditation and stuff like that, and I would find them to be 0 to moderate benefit depending on the situation. When I took the CBD, it was moderate to high benefit. It would really effectively calm me down for a long time. It was not it, I had no addictive thing with it, which is another thing that I was worried about. One thing I didn't like about it is it made my sinuses feel dried out. So maybe that's part of the reason I never felt it was addictive. But I did think it was a very helpful intervention to just calm my limbic system down. And I thought that was all there was to it. But to answer your question, Chrissy, then when I looked into it more, I read a couple of books on the endocannabinoid system, and I found out about CB1 receptors and CB2 receptors and how the body makes its own cannabinoids, like anandamine, and how these external things impact it and all the rest. And I realized how big an impact the endocannabinoids and then also the endorphins have on the nervous system. And so the endocannabinoids, the CB2 receptors, are primarily working on the immune system, and primarily they are switching off this innate response and increasing the regulatory stopping the immune system overreactive response, and then the endorphin system, which is helping to regulate the whole immune system. And I tried the interventions for both. I tried the CBD for the endocannabinoid system. I tried low dose naltrexone, which I talked about in other episodes, for the endorphin part of helping the immune system to regulate itself. To be honest, I never found the low dose naltrexone very effective for me, but I think that's because by then my immune system wasn't really reactive. It's just that I still had the toxin. But at the time when I tried the CBD, I think I had the toxin, but also my limbic system was really overreacting. My limbic system and my immune system was really overreacting. And I found the CBD really effective for both, personally. And I think Dr. Shade is especially saying, like in children, like it's really hard to get children to take anything. I'm not misquoting with that, but I think CBD is allowed for children, right?
I don't know.
I believe it is. I know they give it to animals and all the rest of it. I think it is in very moderate doses. Obviously, you don't want to overdo it. But just, like especially with kids, if they're reacting to everything, it's bad enough if you're an adult, but when you're a kid, you don't understand. It's like,
no,
it's just a horrible, horrible situation to be in. And so it's like the one thing that actually was effective. And I have to say, in my experience, it was exactly the same. It was the one thing that was actually effective. Even without resolving the root problem, my lead was still sky high and, all these other things, but it just helped my immune system to calm down. And I think it's through that action on the CB2 receptors, Chrissy, is actually the primary thing and why it works. Whereas other things, because I took other things that are supposed to calm you down, like, sedatives, and they were not effective at all. They may have made me like my heart rate a little bit less high, but they did not make my body any less reactive. Whereas the CBD actually made my body less reactive. Suddenly I was able to, deal with chemicals in the environment and in, different foods and all the rest of it, different supplements I wasn't able to handle before without having a reaction. I'm not saying this to justify my own use of it. I don't think I've used any this year or last year. It's been a while now. Any cannabis product of any type, but it was useful while it was useful. I do think there are downsides to these things. Like I said, I still would prefer my surgeon to not be on CBD rather than be on CBD. So I'm not saying it's like just a good thing to have all the time, but if you're in that space where your body is chronically responding in an inflammatory way to everything, it can be something really useful.
In an ideal world, you'd meet all of your nutritional needs in the form of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and more from the foods you eat. However, unless you prepare all of your food at home from scratch using the highest quality ingredients possible, the reality is that most of us need some nutritional support. Most of us need to take supplements if we want to look, feel, and perform at our best on a consistent daily basis. And this is especially true if you have genes that give you an elevated need of certain nutrients. And this is where Feel Younger can help. What I love about Feel Younger is that they offer a huge range of quality supplements and healthcare products formulated and endorsed by Elwin Robinson, including must-haves like magnesium glycinate and vitamins B12, D3, and K2. And they do it at affordable prices with free shipping for orders over $50 without ever compromising on quality, purity, or potency. To learn more about how Feel Younger supplements can give your health a boost while supporting this podcast, please visit feelyounger.net and use promo code Rejuvenate to get 20% off your first order. That's promo code Rejuvenate for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. Yeah, but it's good to know. I mean, it's like, this is the other thing, is presenting the alternatives that are out there so people can investigate, because as we've seen, certain things, like you were saying with the DNRS, that might be effective for someone not. The CBD might be effective for others, maybe not. It's having that look around things, not just in the mainstream, like you say, we're branching out a little bit so that people can investigate and see, because one of those options might be exactly what they need.
And I should clarify, I keep using the word mainstream, but really in the mainstream, they don't accept any of this. So I guess when I say mainstream, I mean like the mainstream functional medicine world, which is kind of mainstream these days, rather than like the completely mainstream. But yeah, absolutely. But I think they're right about a lot of stuff. So mainstream isn't an insult. Maybe it seems that way sometimes, the way I describe it, but it just means like the popular, most common way of looking at something. And so In this case, because CIRS is only recognized by a small percentage of the population, that percentage, what most of them believe, is what I'm calling mainstream. And then I'm presenting some alternative stuff as well. So CIRS is not something that I have anymore. I do believe it is something that I did have. I was diagnosed by it by a functional medicine practitioner in 2021. She thought it was rooted in mold. We tested for mold in me and it was there, but it was moderate. And I think then later I, on my own, found the lead, and that seems like the more likely culprit for why everything was so dysregulated in me. But of course, it's a chicken and egg situation. Actually, now I'm not announcing this yet because I have not proved it. But once I do certain testing, I may have found an even more root cause for everything that I will share with you if you're interested. And I think often there's many root causes. For most people who have these really complicated chronic health problems, and if you're listening to this, either you do or someone you care about does, or you're a practitioner helping them, because, I guess why else would you find something as unmainstream as this? Often there are multiple different root causes. But I think looking through this lens of CIRS can be really helpful if you generally have strong reactions to things. Even if, you don't think mold is the thing. That's why I kind of wanted to broaden it from that a little bit. I know, a lot of people watching this, for instance, are going to think that the problem is, maybe copper or iron, for instance, and they may be right. But, iron, for instance, is very known as well to, contribute to this inflammatory kind of situation, like classically as well. So it's not mutually exclusive. It's not like, do I have CIRS or do I have high iron, for instance? Like the two can go hand in hand and would feed into each other.
Well, yeah, it's like you said earlier as well. It's like some of the signs and the symptoms tend to be the same for all those things. It's kind of drilling down and trying to figure those things out, which can also be quite frustrating and taxing, especially when you just want to get better and you don't know how to move forward.
Yes. And the last thing I'll add, to go back to why am I talking about this in the first place, talking about Mikhaila Peterson and Jordan Peterson. So, these guys are known for many things, but I guess Mikhaila especially is known for popularizing this specific diet, this lion diet, which you call it, which is great branding. I thought it's a really good name because who doesn't want to be more lion-like? The idea, but basically just eating beef. And this is what she did. And what Jordan did, is my understanding. They would just eat beef and water and salt, nothing else. And they both felt a lot better. She had really severe health problems as well from being a child. Like autoimmune health problems specifically, like I think arthritis to the point she had to have a hip replaced or something like that. Certainly she had to have something replaced, as a teenager. So really bad health problems. I think I've heard from her perspective that her father was very mainstream in his views, and so she had to, I guess, the combination of seeing the mainstream utterly fail to help his daughter, and his daughter kind of finding things that maybe were more effective and educating him is what slowly brought him around. But anyway, I think, really she deserves more credit for any of the health stuff. And she obviously found this diet, and her, most of her symptoms went away, and good for her. And I have had some, but obviously in Jordan, for a certain period of time, it was kind of effective, but maybe it wasn't. I mean, I know there's a hell of a lot going on in his life. He became like a global figure and a target of a lot of, dislike. And I'm sure that has a very high psychological toll to anyone other than, a psychopath. So kind of maybe proves he isn't a psychopath, at least by just how negatively it seemed to impact him. But so I realize there's a lot of stress and there's a lot of other factors involved, I guess is what I'm saying. But I feel like by taking this approach of purely eliminating and avoiding anything which triggered an inflammatory response, both of their stories, especially Jordan's story, is like a warning of what happens when you only do that. When you do that, but you don't ask yourself the question, okay, why am I responding to everything other than beef and water? And I realized, we've got to face reality and deal with things as they are, right? Like, so, I talked about for many years, I had quite a limited diet. I would say the distinction was, though, as I showed in an episode a while ago, even though my diet was quite limited, it was actually more nutritionally complete than most people's diets. When you're only having beef is pretty good, but it's low in some things, specifically carbohydrates. And as we said before, when you're having no carbohydrates, I do believe some people's bodies are genetically more adapted to a very low carbohydrate diet than others. If your near ancestors were more hunter-gatherers, that may be okay. But the average, I would say, really struggles with zero carbohydrate for a long time. You've got to, increase your stress chemicals to be able to keep up with that. And if your stress chemicals are already high because you have something like CIRS, then that's not going to help. That's going to make the situation worse. And so I suppose, I'm talking a lot about their personal lives, but their lives are hardly personal, right? They're splashed all over mainstream media and social media and all the rest of it. So that's why I feel okay commenting about it. Obviously, I wish them well, truly. But the more kind of general lesson I would hope we could all learn from their willingness to share their struggle so publicly is that when you have an issue where your body reacts to lots of stuff, eliminating the things it's reacting to is a smart thing to do. Because as I said near the beginning, if you carry on having the things that your body and specifically your immune system is reacting to, it's never going to calm down. It's never going to stop being overly reactive. So I get that. But I don't know how much effort other than that they, and I guess especially Jordan, Mikhaila maybe more so, were putting into also identifying and resolving the root causes of why their body was so reactive to so many different things. And that's the thing that I, really encourage people to do. This message may not be necessary for my average viewer, I don't know, but even if it reaches only one or two people, it's such an important message. Find those root causes. And unfortunately, I can't tell you, anyone who tells you it's definitely this one thing, they may well mean well, but they're probably wrong because there's many different things it can be. And so that's why I created the Rejuvenate Blueprint. So you can work out what the root causes are, and there may actually be loads of them. And so it can also help you to identify, what are the most important root causes. And so that's why I've narrowed it down to 7. There's genetic causes, there's lack of certain nutrients, there's an excess of certain toxins, there's an imbalance in certain systems, especially hormones in the body. There's a lack of balance in lifestyle factors. There is chronic, usually hidden infections, and then there is emotional stroke psychological issues. If you look under each of those categories with, sincere questioning, you will find those causes for you, even if you haven't up until now. If you look at every nutrient, look at every hormone, etc., like if you go through the whole list and look at every possible thing, you will find it, and you'll probably find it quite quickly. It's really simple, even if you spent years or decades not be able to find it. And that's the feedback that I get from clients again and again. Sooner or later they have their breakthrough, and then the question is always, why on earth why did no one else, I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but I've had people say, I spent so much money, I've been to this famous doctor, I've been to that famous clinic, I've done that highly expensive famous procedure, etc. Why did no one point this out? And it's not because all those doctors and systems didn't have more expertise than me. I'm sure they did, but the point is that they were not looking broadly enough. They were not looking at all the factors. They were specialized on their thing, which I'm sure they know way more about than me, whether that's toxins or whether that's nutrients or whether that's whatever. But you have to be able to zoom out and look at all the potential factors. And so that's why we'll carry on doing these episodes. And I suppose the last word from me will be, if you would like me to do this treatment to any other condition that you have or you're interested in, let us know in the comments, specifically on YouTube, or if you really don't want to be on YouTube, you can also email me, and we may well do an episode on it in the future.
Absolutely. Elwin, that was a great discussion on CIRS. And also, I do love it when you bring this out, because it does help people to be able to identify things that they potentially haven't, and also give those options. So thank you so much for that. So everyone, please do put your comments below. Let us know. Let us know if you want an episode like this on another topic. We always appreciate you guys being here. And as always, we'll see you next time.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that video. You may have noticed I recommended a few different videos in that episode. And one of the ones I recommend is just here, if you want to click there. Or another one I recommend is just below, if you want to click on that one and watch that next.